Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone as we are preparing for Shabbat Kodesh, Shabbat Parashat Acharei Mot, our first week after Pesach, our first Shabbat after the holiday of Pesach, and they're having this week our own Acharei Mot. Let's take a look at the parasha and see some of the lessons that we can learn from this week's parasha. Interesting to note, the beginning of the parasha primarily talks about the avodah, the service that would happen on Yom Kippur. But to start off the introduction of the service that would happen on Yom Kippur, the parasha tells us that this is happening after the two sons of Aharon, Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aharon, after the death of the two sons of Aharon, who died B'korvatam Lefnei Adonai Vayamutu, as they were coming close to Hashem, and they died. So, when you're learning a Chumash, you really have to look at the parasha and you have to think to yourself, why is Hashem putting certain things in certain places? So the first question we have to ask is, if the beginning of the parasha is really talking about Yom Kippur, the service of Yom Kippur, so what's the connection between Aharon's two sons' death and Yom Kippur? The second thing is, we have to ask ourselves, all that Aharon's children wanted to do, it says, B'korvatam lefnei Adonai. They wanted to come closer to Hashem. Really, for that, a person has to die? B'korvatam lefnei Adonai. They want to come closer to Hashem. I saw a beautiful explanation, and it's based on a true story. A true story in the mid-19th century in San Francisco, here in the United States. They lived a very wealthy gentleman by the name of Joshua Norton. And in his business dealings, something went wrong, and he lost all of his money, and he was reduced to living in a very down-torn apartment, and he ended up working in a Chinese rice factory. He fell from the upper echelons of society, and this whole thing that happened caused a big toll, took a big mental toll on Joshua Norton's mind. And he became fixated on the problems of society, the problems of government, and in his irrational conclusion to what was going on, he felt the problem of the United States of America was that there was no emperor. And so in order to fix that mistake, he appointed himself the only one qualified to serve in the capacity of emperor, and proclaimed himself the emperor of these United States of America. And, as he was once a wealthy man, people heard about it, and the local newspapers picked up the story, and they lightheartedly published Norton's proclamation. For his own sake, Joshua Norton bought a second-hand military uniform complete with medals, ribbons, and everything else. And he called himself emperor. His first official act was to abolish political parties. He drew up a new constitution. He printed for himself new money, new currency for the imperial government of the United States. Now, all his friends and former business associates played along with Norton's illusions of grandeur. Norton freely dined at the finest restaurants. He rode public transportation for free. He put a tax on businesses, 25 cents per business. And if you had a big business, he charged you $3 a year. And many times he tried to negotiate multi-million-dollar loans from his former wealthy friends. And instead he settled for a 50 cent coin. And it went down for 20 years. Joshua Norton acted as the emperor in his own mind of the United States. In the winter of the year 1880, Norton passed away. It's reported in the newspapers that 20,000 people showed up at his funeral. Everyone, all people of society, from the higher ups to the lowers, everybody came to his funeral. And in fact, in the San Francisco Chronicle, they had the front page saying Leroy est mort, that the emperor, the king, is dead. Now, it's a sad but little funny story as well. But the truth is, in some aspect, we are all like Joshua Norton. Why? We all believe illusions of grandeur about ourselves. We feel that what we're doing is correct. Nadav and Avihu, they were trying to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but they were getting closer in a way they thought they needed to do it. They thought that they know what they were doing, just like Joshua Norton, Lahavdil, also thought that he was the emperor and knew what to fix everything. The parasha tells us that Avihu's mistake was they also felt that they knew what they were doing. Comes Yom Kippur, and that's why this is an introduction to Yom Kippur, because in Yom Kippur we say Ki vayom hazeh yechaper alechem letaher etchem lefnei Hashem titaharu, that Yom Kippur is a day that we're coming to be cleansed. What does this mean? The coming to be cleansed. We're coming on Yom Kippur to analyze and evaluate what we've done the year before. And if we looked at it and we really honestly looked at it and said, maybe I thought I was doing mitzvot, but really they weren't. Maybe I thought I was doing something right, but it wasn't. That is what's supposed to happen on Yom Kippur. We don't want to live like the story Joshua Norton, who thought for 20 years that he was the emperor of the United States, while he was really just a poor person, that people felt bad for him and let him get away with his antics. But we want to be able to focus on what's right. And that's why the Pasha starts off. Nadav Avihu, you wanted to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of that you died. You want to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you come close on Yom Kippur. And you come close in the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to come close. Not in a person's own way. Towards the end of his life, the famous Baal Musar, Rav Yitzchak Blazer, who was known as Rav Itzele Peterberger, was invited to the Slobodka Yeshiva to give a shmuz about Yom Kippur. And it was one of the final speeches he would give. It was, the yeshiva was packed. There was no room for anybody. There's a standing room, there was nothing left already. And Rav Itzele shared a story. He shared a story about a group of soldiers who rebelled against the king. They ran away from the front lines and they refused to participate in any wars. As the king's loyal soldiers conducted a search for them, these deserters hid in the forest and managed to stay a step ahead of the soldiers at all times. And for many years, they were able to stay abandoned from the army. And finally, a new king arose. And he said, anyone who deserted the army would be forgiven. Just come back and you can join the army now. Now, these people are already much older. And they said, listen, we can't keep running. Let us go back. And let us say we're here, we're ready to fight for the king. And so the group of soldiers decided to come back. They put on their uniform and they journeyed back to the palace. But there was one problem. As they got closer to the palace, the soldiers of the palace saw them and started to laugh. They didn't understand why everyone was laughing at them. Finally, arrived at the palace itself. And they walked up to the king and they said, Your Royal Highness, we're done running away from the army. We're here to serve. We're here to fight for your honor. We came back. The king looked at the old man, at all the old men, and smirked. And a smirk appeared on his face. He was smiling. The king's advisors saw the king smile and they began to laugh. And the king said to them, now you're coming back when you're all old. What can you do for us now? When you were young and in good shape, you can fight for the army. Now you're coming back saying, I'm sorry, you're ready to fight. You're all old. Your whole uniform doesn't fit. You're all hunchbacked, all these different problems. And now you come back. When Rav Itzele concluded the story, he fainted on the spot. The students right away ran up to him to try to help him. As soon as he came back, He said, crying, I'm too old to fight for the king. He will just laugh me out of the room. But you boys are young and strong. You can fight for the king. Then as he regained more of his strength, he directed the boys once more with the purpose to go fight for the king. This is Yom Kippur. This is the service which we're doing Yom Kippur, is when we're supposed to readjust to what we've been doing and now go on the right path to do the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why our parasha, when it starts off, the whole service about Yom Kippur starts off with Nadav and Avihu. They thought they were doing right, but they were doing wrong. Because of that, they pay the price with their life. We too, a lot of times, think we're doing right. No, you have to stop and really think. Hashem is ready to forgive you if you're going to rejoin the service. But you got to do it now before it is too late. The next pasuk continues that you can't come to Hashem at any time. The Kohen Gadol can't go into the Kodesh Kedashim at any time. And even when he does come in, it says he can't come in empty-handed. It can't come in empty-handed. That's also true. On Yom Kippur, when you're allowed to come in, Hashem says, I will appear on top of the cover of the Aron, right on the Kaporet. And Hashem says, I will show up in a cloud. Ki be'anan ira'el kaporet. For I will appear, in a cloud I will appear upon the cover of the Aron. The great Rabbi Gamliel Rabinowitz, Shlita, learned something very important from this. He says, here you see that when the Kohen Gadol comes into the Kodesh Kedashim, he only can come once a year. And when he comes in, which means inside within, right? The Kodesh Kedashim, it's all the way inside. It's all covered up always. He comes in, and even when he comes in and he sees Hashem, Hashem is going to appear in a cloud. And again, it's hidden a little more, right? He says every time, every moment, at every juncture that a person feels that his life is hard, it's covered, it's cloudy, it's not clear, there's problems, he has to know that that's when Hashem is really, really close to him. Like we have that song, Va'afilu be'hastara, shebetocha hastara. A person is Hashem is. It's Hashem says, even when ani aster panim, when I'm hiding my face, I'm really there, right next to you also. And that's what Gamliel Rabbeinu says we learn from this pasuk, is that when Hashem is inside in the Kodesh Kedashim, and even when you're allowed to come in, you still don't actually see him. He's covered in a cloud. There's always a covering and a covering and a covering. Because concealed within everything, in the darkness, and somewhere you can't see, that's where Hashem's presence is. The Baal Shem Tov would explain it that Hashem puts up optical illusions. But if a person really wants to find Hashem, Hashem is there. Astir Panim means Hashem is hiding, but if you really want to look for him, you'll find it. There's a well-known story, analogy, that there was once a man who had problem after problem. You know, he would have one problem, he'd be sick, then he would get better, it'd be okay for a little bit, and then a few months later, another problem, a child problem, this problem, money problem, there's always some sort of problem. And one night, as he was getting ready for bed, and he was saying Kriyat Shema, he started to cry. He said, Keli, Keli, Hashem, Hashem, Lama Azavtani, why did you leave me? Hashem, I feel like you left me, you're not here. That night, the man dreamed that he was walking on a long path. And he looks back where he was walking, he sees two sets of footprints. One very big, one, he saw two sets of footprints. Two sets. And then he says whenever there was a big path, he saw two sets of footprints. Whenever the path was very narrow, he saw only one set of footprints. And he, in his dream, started to think, what did this mean? Then he says, you know what this shows me? All these steps show me my life, my journey of life. From when I was a child till now, from every part of my life, and I see two sets of footprints. the wider spaces where I see two sets of footprints, that's my footprints and Hashem's footprints next to me. And when it's a narrow path, that's when it was really hard and I had a hard time. And it was just my footprints there. And that's the time that Hashem left me. I can't understand it. Hashem, when it's a narrow path, that's when I really need you. Why are you not there? Why in my life, when it's good, you're there with me, and when it's not good, you're not there with me?
The footsteps in front. The footsteps in front is Hashem living.
So suddenly he heard a voice, a gentle voice saying to him, my beloved son, you're greatly mistaken. While it's true that there are difficult times, that the road narrows, and you see one set of footprints, and you think I'm abandoning you and that you're lonely and all by yourself, that's all a mistake. Because those one set of footprints that you see in the narrow path, that is my footprints, says Hashem. During all your difficult times, I carried you across. We have to realize that during the times that we feel most forsaken, when we go through difficult times, that's when Hashem is closest to us, because He's helping us navigate and get through them. People have to look. People are very self-centered. We feel our pain. This is our problem, our pain, our trouble. What do we call Hashem? One of the things we call Hashem is Avinu Sheba Shamayim, our Father who is in heaven. If our children are chas shalom sick or not feeling well, doesn't the parent feel it also? How could someone say, Hashem, you left me? If Hashem is our Father, and if we're going through a pain, who's feeling that pain with us? It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but people don't see it that way. Immediately, Hashem, why you did this? Hashem, why you did that? Why Hashem did that? Why Hashem did this? Hashem is feeling the pain with you. Harav David Dubiner, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, was a big Talmid Chacham in Tzfat. For many years, he was married to his wife, and they did not have a child. Finally, after 10 years or so, a son was finally born to them, one child. And it was a big simcha. The entire community came out with simcha. Everyone was excited. And at 17 years old, his son got engaged. And everyone was really excited. Simcha, big parties. But prior to the wedding, about a few weeks before the wedding, his 17-year-old son got sick and died. This one child of the Chacham, of this rabbi. Only one child, 17 years old. After many years waiting for the child, 17 years old, before we get married, this boy, he dies. The shock and pain was throughout the whole community. Everyone attended the funeral. Everyone was crying, except for one person. The father. People came for the first 3 days, and he wasn't crying at all. And on the fourth day of Shiva, he began to cry. And he cried for the remainder of the Shiva. And his family and his friends asked him after the Shiva, what happened the first 3 days you didn't cry? And afterwards you started to cry. He said as follows, I believe with complete faith in Hashem, who gave me a precious gift, my son. He took him back with complete justice. And I remained silent. But then, on the fourth day, I realized that when a father strikes his child, and even though I deserve the punishment, it causes the father great pain, even more than that of his son. If that's true, then it came to my attention that Hashem, who punished me by taking my son, is more in pain than me myself. And so I started to cry because Hashem is in pain. Because the Shekhinah is in pain, I started to cry as well. That's what I realized on the fourth day, he said. It's a very different way of looking at it. When Hashem is covered up and we don't see it so clearly, and we think Hashem is not there. On the opposite, Hashem is there, Hashem is carrying us through. And not only that, even though Hashem is justified in doing what He does to us all the time, But Hashem also feels our pain. He's our Father. And as such, we have to feel bad that Hashem has to feel bad for us. Even though He has to give us whatever He needs to do, He also feels bad through it. It's a very different way of looking at troubles and problems that people have in life. Moving on to our third and final lesson from this week's parasha. I saw this from the late chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He says that he was once in a dialogue with a Muslim imam from the Middle East, and who seemed to be a moderate man, and they were talking about different things. And one day, as they were talking, the imam turns to him and says, "Why do you Jews need a land? Judaism is a religion. It's not a country or a nation. Why do you need a land?" Jonathan Sachs says that at that point he stopped talking to this imam and said to him, "There's 56 Islamic states in the world, over 100 nations with a Christian majority, but there's only one Jewish state, 1/25 the size of France, and approximately the size of a national park, the Kruger National Park in South Africa." So a national park in South Africa is the size of Eretz Yisrael. Small place. And yet, the question is why we need a land. But then Rabbi Sachs says as follows. He says the truth is, why is it that we need a land? You know, the whole Torah, if you really think about it, Hashem is promising Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, you're going to get the land of Eretz Yisrael. The Jews are in Egypt, are coming out, going to Eretz Yisrael. They couldn't go directly, 40 years in the desert, finally going to go. Yeshua is going to take them in. The whole Hamishah Torah is really about reaching Eretz Yisrael, to get into Eretz Yisrael. Why is getting to the land of Israel such an important part in Judaism? It is. Having Eretz Yisrael is the important part of Judaism. But why is it so? Why do we need to have a land? In this week's parasha, in chapter 18, we have Hashem tells us the mitzvot about relations, about which marriages are permitted, which ones are not, that you can't have two men together, you cannot marry a mother-in-law. All these different dinim are brought in this week's parasha. Interesting, it comes right after on Yom Kippur. We're just talking about Yom Kippur. And in fact, we actually read this on Yom Kippur as well. And no matter how angelic you are, sins of such a nature are always something you have to be afraid of and taken care of. But at the end of all this, the Torah tells us something very interesting. The Torah tells us, don't do these things. Why don't do these things? Because the land will spit you out. Al titame'u b'chol eila ki b'chol eila nitmeu hagoyim asher ani mishalech mipenechem. These goyim that I'm sending out in front of you, Hashem says, all these Canaan, they did all these things, all these sexual sins they did. V'titamah haaretz, and they contaminated the land. V'afkod avona aleya, now they have their sin upon them. V'takiha haaretz et yoshveya, and this land is going to spit them out. So you, Hashem says, make sure that all these ta'ivot, all these abominations that Hashem doesn't like, all these sins and relations, don't do them, because this is where you're going to stay here. Otherwise, you're going to get kicked out. Whoever does any of these sins, the souls doing so will be cut off from among the nation. The Ramban has a huge question on this. The Ramban says, Moshe ben Nachman, the Nachmanides, asks as follows. He says, I don't understand. The Pasuk says that if you're going to be doing these sins of relations, forbidden relations, going to kick you out of the land. He says, but the sins of these forbidden relations is a sin in the body. It's not a sin that's dependent on the land. We know that we learned The pasuk is going to tell us later on in chapter 26 in Vayikra that if you don't let Shemitah in the land of Eretz Yisrael, if you don't follow Shemitah, Hashem will kick you out so the land can make up the Shemitah. That's actually what happened in the first Beit HaMikdash, 70 years, because of the Shemitah. I got to make up the Shemitah years that we didn't keep. So that makes sense. That's what the Ramban says. It's a mitzvah tilut ba'aretz. You didn't keep the mitzvahs that are commanded on the land, so that's why you got kicked out. You didn't do it. But the mitzvah of relations is not a mitzvah in the land. It's a mitzvah of the person. So the Ramban goes on to explain, bringing from the Sifri, whoever lives outside the land of Eretz Yisrael is as if he has no Hashem. Living in the land of Eretz Yisrael, we are taught, is equal importance to all the mitzvot in the Torah.
Maybe the good is part of
The land. Okay. Rabbi Isaac says as follows. He says, the idea of having a land, the importance that Hashem puts on the land, is because of a whole different understanding. Doing mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael is definitely different than doing mitzvahs outside of Eretz Yisrael. But there's something more important of it. He goes with the understanding. The Ramban goes with a different understanding, based on Yisod, based on Kabbalah, but in a non-mystical way. Rabbi Sachs explains as follows: that Hashem created the world from the beginning to be in the most pristine stage. Everything should be perfect. Adam Harishon and Chava right away sinned. Cain and Evel right away fight, people killing each other. As life got on, Hashem says, I regretted making life, decided to make a Mabul. Started with Noah. Noah again starts, again afterwards, all this craziness happens. Until Abraham Avinu. Abraham Avinu, the Torah says Hashem loves Abraham Avinu. Why does Hashem love Abraham Avinu? The Torah says, because I see that Abraham Avinu will show his children how to continue. He's teaching his children how to continue to do what he does. The Torah in Devarim tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, when you come to Eretz Yisrael and you take possession of it, make sure to carefully keep all the Torah mitzvot. Why? Because when the Goyim see this, they're going to say, wow, look at the Chachma, look at the amazing knowledge and wisdom that the Jews have. Because they're keeping the Hukim, the Mishpatim, all the laws that Hashem has. Why? Rabbi Sachs explains as follows. Avraham Avinu's job, which became Yitzchak's job, Yaakov's job, and all of Klal Yisrael's job, is what we always say, that we're the Or Legoim, that we are the light for the nations. You need to have an ideal society in the world in order the whole world can look at and say, this is what we should learn from. When Shlomo HaMelech was king, in what was known as Pax Salomon, the Peace of Solomon, the whole world came to the Beit HaMikdash. Everyone came to learn from Shlomo HaMelech. People looked to Eretz Yisrael to learn to see how to do things. This was the ideal of having the land of Eretz Yisrael. When you have a land where Jews live there, where they have an ideal society that's based on the Torah, that the Goyim would say, whoa, where do you have such chachma from? Where do you have such wisdom from? Because you're following all the commandments that it says in the Torah. That means right now, we had today the day of remembrance for the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah, and next week, B'ezrat Hashem, you're going to have the day of independence of Eretz Yisrael. They're going to have the parades in Manhattan and all that. And it's very good to have Israeli pride and to show that we are Jews who support Eretz Yisrael. But the number one support of Eretz Yisrael is that you live in the land and you completely follow the Torah as prescribed to live in the land. Because the whole point of having the land of Eretz Yisrael is for us to live in the ideal state that we're supposed to and be a light for everyone. And therefore, the Torah tells us if you're going to make sins that are sins of a guf, a body sin, but it's not just the sin of the body, it's the sin of society. When you show that the marriage isn't holy, the marriage between a man and a woman isn't holy, then you just show that there's no Torah in the society. When you're doing any type of the sins that the relations that the Torah goes through, you've broken down society. The only reason why we have Eretz Yisrael is to be a holy society. And if we can't do that, the Torah tells us it will spit us out from there. That is the point of Eretz Yisrael. And so I saw, as I was preparing, a story that happened with Rav Aharon Leib Steinman. That there was a man who was in the United States, had a business of manufacturing fine jewelry. And he started to notice that the amount of gold he brings in, and he makes the products, there's supposed to be some leftover raw material, and the raw material is missing. Little by little, there's always something missing. There's a loss. So he's trying to find out what happened, and he's starting to investigate, and he realizes that one of the non-Jewish workers that he has, he thinks he's stealing them. He makes a trip to Bnei Brak for another reason. He goes to Eretz Yisrael, he's in Bnei Brak, and he stops by Aaron Leib, and he asks him, what can I do? I think my guy is, one of the guys that are working for me is stealing. What can I do? Should I approach him? Should I tell the cops? What should I do? And Rabbi Aaron Leib tells him, he said, it's a guy? He said, yeah. He says, well, a guy can hargen. A guy can kill. A non-Jew can kill. Don't do anything about it. No. Okay, fine. That's what Aaron Leib said. He gets back to his business. This time he decides to install cameras. He installs cameras. He's watching everything. And he sees it red-handedly. This guy is taking the gold and pocketing it. Small pieces, small pieces. So he has a friend in Eretz Yisrael. He says, please go to Rabbi Aaron Leib and Steinman and ask him. He says, now I found him on camera. I have video evidence. What should I do? Can I call him to the authorities? So his friend goes to Rabbi Aaron Leib. And Aaron Leib says to his friend, don't report him. It's going to be very dangerous if you report him. Don't report him. The guy calls his friend, tells us what Aaron Leib said. The owner of the jewelry store says, no, it can't be. You didn't explain to him right. Okay, write down what I'm telling you and explain to him exactly as I said, and go back to Aaron Leib and tell him the way I told you. So the next day he goes back. And again, Aaron Leib says, I understand your question. I know where you're coming from. And I'm telling you, don't do anything about it. It's very dangerous. The story goes on that it was just a few short weeks later after Aaron Leib told him, do not do anything about it, that this man, the owner of the manufacturing jewelry store, he is watching the news, and he sees on the news that his non-Jewish worker was arrested. What happened? He was in a local bodega, and someone accidentally bumped into him, and they started a fist fight. And the fist fight led one thing to the next until this man pulled out a gun from his belt and shot the other person and killed him. And now he was arrested and going away for a very long time. The jewelry owner was in shock when he saw this. He sat in his place for a long time, and he's in his mind. He remembered what Aaron Leib told him. It's not worth starting up with a guy. There's two different types of societies out there. The Western society likes to always say they have Judo-Christian values. It's really Jewish values that they wrap into whatever they want to have, because the values come from the Torah. The Torah sets up how a real society is supposed to exist. And that is the way that we're supposed to live. And that's why we're not allowed to follow. You're not allowed to go in the ways of the Goyim, because it's not the ideal way to live. The ideal way to live is prescribed in the Torah. I will die with this. I would like to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Remember the lessons that don't live in illusion. Let Yom Kippur be the wake-up call. You don't have to actually wait for Yom Kippur, but anytime you have a wake-up call, realize and redirect ourselves in the right path. Remember that Hashem, even when He's hidden, He's the one who's getting us through, and He's with us. Even though He's justified and He has to give us punishment from time to time if we're not listening to His call, even then that hurts Him, and we have to feel that pain as well. And we have the final lesson that our whole connection to Eretz Yisrael is based on living al pi derech haTorah, what the Torah tells us to do. And may we be zoched to live bekarov in an ideal society in the times of Mashiach and Meher b'yameinu. Amen. Shabbat shalom lekulam.
Shabbat shalom.